Today, the technical talk is going to be on comments related to a fork in the road stream mitigation in Western U.S. So was created by Peter Skidmore and presented at the Colorado Sustaining Watersheds Conference just about 2 weeks ago, I believe. And this is related to the idea of in the Western U.S., the mitigation market isn't as advanced as it is in the Eastern U.S., and we're trying to figure out what that looks like in the future. So this was comments on this presentation, and I will be talking to Peter Skidmore in early November. I think it looks like November 11th will be a day that I'll have a talk and talk to him and give some thoughts and ideas on this presentation. So by all means, if you have any thoughts or comments or anything you don't like or anything that you like a whole lot, let me know and I can pass it on to him and share those thoughts and concerns. So the situational analysis is in Colorado, we have a 404, well, and this is everywhere in the U.S., you have a 404 stream mitigation. It's an opportunity to protect and restore streams, waters of the U.S. Stream mitigation markets are robust where they exist. They try to reduce risk to providers and limit, with sometimes limited benefits to the resource. In the Western states, we're emerging markets, and the idea is we don't have many stream mitigation banks yet. Do we want to do business as usual, or do we want to try to create something that's a little bit better, a little bit more complicated, a little bit more diverse, if you will? So there's a lot of ideas about what a healthy river is, and the state of science right now says that we have a shift in baseline, we have a loss of reference conditions. There's evidence that possibly messy rivers or dynamic or disturbed rivers could be healthier in a lot of ways. A healthy river supports a full complement of native, aquatic, and riparian species with minimal human intervention. So sometimes a healthy river may not be completely geomorphically stable, is what people are saying, what some scientists are saying right now, but it still may be healthy. And so we also look at channel evolution models, as science is predicting new channel evolution models, as we discussed as a group a couple months ago, this stage 0 channel design, which is kind of worked into the channel evolution models. And then it's also related to kind of the process domains of interest. So what this looks like, as for one example, the channel evolution model, we moved from Simon Surtek and Shrum, and we ended up adding additional stages into here through Kohler and Thorne, 2013. And they talk about these different stages, this different stage of anastomosing, grassed waterways and wetlands systems, or these systems that have no real defined channel. They just have a whole bunch of different braids in different directions. So the idea is that if we're doing mitigation and the stable form of the channel is this big braided system, then shouldn't there be a mechanism to be able to use that for mitigation? Process domains define stream function in a river restoration project. So functions are the physical, chemical, and biological processes that occur in aquatic resources. And this was based on 2008 final ruling. And so the idea is trying to quantify where we have different functions, and with those different functions, if we can get uplift from those functions, that'd be good. The issue is we have streams that are defined sometimes more by biology, other times they're defined more by geology, and sometimes they're by hydrology. So not all streams are created equal, even with the same stream types. So if we have different streams that are functioning more based on geologic constraints, then maybe some of the biological functions aren't as important to the mitigation of that stream, because they wouldn't have had that in a reference condition. Healthy rivers generally have a higher level of complexity. They're generally dynamic over time, and we've talked about rivers being dynamic for years, And of course we talked about having a dynamic equilibrium opposed to have just being static, but they're dynamic over time, and they usually have a lot of heterogeneity, so they're not the same exact channel. So what that means in a lot of reviewed stuff is people look at a meander pattern and say if that meander pattern from the air is the same, then that's homogeneous, whereas natural rivers are more heterogeneous. There's a lot of other aspects to heterogeneity than just plan form, but plan form is one of them. And Peter Skidmore laid out what some of these different plan forms could look like between a straight and a meander and an island braid and the braided system. Management of healthy rivers requires space without as much constraints, which we don't always have. And then flow regimes, sediment continuity, and connectivity. Connectivity of the floodplain, connectivity from upstream to downstream, connectivity for passage. The 2008 final ruling that came out talked about the idea of the stream mitigation markets, and they had a real bias for these basic ideas in the market that were the regulatory market was supposed to be able to be set up for the sorry about that. The idea of having offsets for impacts. It was a commodity-based system, and there was a currency that would be created with these systems, so that you said, okay, well, if I have this much impact of this type of stream, then this is worth this much impact on this type of stream or this much mitigation. So we created currencies and markets for some sort of a commodity. And we ended up having this two-function requirement for mitigation. You have an equivalency, so you want to have some sort of functional uplift. And of course, as many people in North Carolina know, at one point the equivalency was some sort of function of just a linear foot of stream, and that linear foot of stream may not have had internal function or functional lift inside of it. So like one stream was about worth what the next stream was worth, but if you did really bad, then you'd have to fix more streams, and if you did not so bad, then you do less streams. But we're trying to get the idea of this equivalency, and we use functional assessment to look at functional lift to try to understand the impact. And the complexity and variability are often confounded even inside these functional lift matrices. So even inside these matrices, we still are sometimes confounded by the complexities and variability, and then we only can include certain things because we don't have numbers to put on some of these other ideas of complexity. So, but we're trying to get to some idea. We have this equivalency and we want certainty. Certainty, we want water in perpetuity. We want to make sure that this never runs dry. We want it to be a dynamic system, and we want it to have, and we want it to be dynamic equilibrium, but we don't want things to change, which is sometimes very confusing to understand how we could get to that point. So when it comes to mitigation, we kind of want it to be simpler. We want it to be simple so that we can understand it, so we can put numbers and credit and debit and associate with it. And we want it to be stabilized and not move much. And this doesn't always represent what's a stable river, and it kind of puts river restoration inside a box of stabilization and something that's a little bit more simple to apply. So natural channel design has worked really well in this market in the past because it talks about an idea of a dynamic equilibrium but very slow erosional rates. So you can work your success criteria with natural channel design and you see slow erosional rates. And that's worked out pretty good. It streamlines a design approach. It creates a design approach that, even though not all streams are created equal, you can have a 40-step paradise, 40 steps to paradise process that gets you kind of close. And in general, it's accepted. It's accepted. In the U.S., it's accepted in Canada, or starting to be accepted in Canada. It's accepted in different countries. It's more accepted than any other process that's out there right now. And it's fairly simple. It's easy to measure features. I say it's fairly simple. It's not, I'm not trying to say that anybody can go out and do it, but I'm trying to say that there's a lot more complexity that is not understood that can be simplified through reference criteria that can be applied to a restoration project that couldn't be quantified through analytical equations. And stabilization integrated for protection and certainty. So we also, when we're not quite sure, we put in a little bit more rock. I believe Will Harmon said a number of years ago, no rock too big, no pool too deep. And that's kind of how we've approached it a little bit with natural channel design over the years. The issue that we're coming up with in science is that the consensus opinion, which of course a consensus opinion is not fact, but the consensus opinion is that maybe some of these things, maybe mitigation isn't exactly what we thought it was in the past. So Kondoff in 1998, Mathis Kondoff said, it is often assumed that restoration projects are beneficial, but many well-intended projects are actually ineffective or detrimental. And I would say I have to agree with that. I've seen a number of projects that, went in the ground and people spent a lot of time and effort and wanted to do a really good project, but it had very little uplift for what they were trying to do. And sometimes they don't even really define what they were trying to do. So, but that's also part of a growing pain. I can think of times when my kids make Legos and they're trying to build something amazing, but it doesn't really look very amazing. And sometimes it takes them a step back, but there's something to be said about learning in that process too. We just don't want to be learning forever. We at some point want to be able to be progressing forward. But I would agree with Mathis Kondoff's comment, and I can't say that I agree with a lot of the comments that he makes, but I would agree with that one. Empirical evaluation of channel restoration projects document the little evidence of ecological successful outcomes. ... And in some cases even found evidence of increased degradation. In general, I don't agree with a whole lot of things when I see ... dots in the middle, because I never know what's in there. But when I looked at this, Margaret Palmer and Emily Barnhart had walked a lot of projects with North Carolina State University, which I've been blessed to be a part of in 2004, 2005 for a 2007 publication. A lot of this statement comes out of 2007 publication. And I know what projects that were increased in degradation. People in North Carolina, if you think of Price Park, the restoration that was done there in the early 2000s and the degradation that occurred after that channel was tried to be designed with an urban regional curve. The empirical evaluation of channel restoration projects documented little evidence and ecological successful outcomes, and that's one of those projects. So I think there are some projects that are successful, but at the time that this was written was probably as a result of that 2007 publication. Was really work in 2004 that was in the ground, and so I can kind of agree with that idea. I think we're doing better now, but I can agree with that idea. And then the final one was a quote by Martin Doyle and Douglas Shields Jr. And the balance of the published evidence suggests that the current practices of stream restoration in terms of scale technique cannot be assumed to provide the demonstrable physical, chemical, or biological functional uplift. And what I would say is that this information, I kind of agree with that too. But the projects that they were looking at the time were also some of the same projects that Emily Bernhardt and Margaret Palmer were looking at, which were from the range of 2000 to 2007. And we've learned a lot since then. And we're trying to build goals and objectives into our projects in a better way than just saying that we're doing this project to improve habitat and to stabilize the river, improve stability and improve habitat, which is what we were saying in the early 2000s, is that's why we're doing the restoration projects. And the result wasn't always that valuable. But since then, we have seen a lot of projects. Both Barnhart and Doyle are in North Carolina. They have opportunities to see a lot of these projects that are doing a little bit better. But what I would say is that Martin Doyle and Douglas Shields Jr. quote is really based on the Emily Barnhart and Margaret Palmer data. So even though they're two different quotes, they're essentially the same quote. It's the same body of knowledge. that same sharing of information that was provided to them initially by North Carolina State University on projects. I believe Resource Institute had shared a number of projects as well with them. And then the final one is a quote that's still in review, so it's kind of a 2020 quote. The one comment I would say about all these things is these people are in the university setting. They're talking about projects from 2000 and 2007 to 2007, and they're publishing in 2012. The idea that it can take up to 12 years to get an opinion about science published in a scientific journal is always something that's a bit humbling. Our industry is moving fast, and as Martin Doyle shared this information at conferences, Emily Bernhardt shared this information at conferences even before it was published. We had practitioners that were getting the feedback and saying, okay, let's try to build our goals and objectives better. Let's try to do better than this. So it's interesting how by sharing information between the university and the industry, that it actually moves us faster than some of the publications come out at times, which is an amazing credit to our industry right now. And the final quote was, this contradiction between the goals of restoration practitioners and the most accepted principles of river science, ... have shaped the development of stream mitigation banking. I don't know what the ... is, and I don't know what the contradictions between the goals and restoration of the practitioners are. But I do know one thing, that goals and objectives of river restoration practicing has changed developing the development of stream mitigation banking. So they have in some circumstances, but I would still leave this as a big question mark. I don't know that that's the case, but essentially there is a consensus that not all these projects, when monitored, are successful, and that we can be doing better at meeting goals and objectives with mitigation, and that mitigation has been shaped by simplicity at times. But we're trying to find a way to buy and sell things, and nobody likes to figure out how to buy a gallon of milk by going in there and having to put together a big long equation and formula for what their price of milk is. People would rather see a sticker on that price of milk to tell you how much it costs. So there is an inherent idea of moving away from that high level of complexity in mitigation, because it is a commodity, markets are being bought and sold. Markets are functioning, and simplicity and stabilization ensures market efficiency. So in other words, if you bought a jug of milk and it was spoiled, that's not very stable. And if you bought a jug of milk and the price tag said, well, it depends, come up to the counter and we'll calculate how much this milk will cost you, that's not a very good market. You're not going to sell milk very well unless somebody just really, really needs milk, and then they'll be limited to whatever you want to sell for them, whatever the quality of that milk is. But limited functional lift, simplification, and stabilization reduce function at times. So we simplify things, and sometimes we don't see the lift that we'd like to see, just because we have to find a way to sell that product. But the West is kind of our next frontier. We're not doing stream mitigation. We only have one approved stream mitigation banking prospectus in Colorado. We have one mitigation bank in Wyoming. We have no stream mitigation banks in California. And the West is kind of this new frontier. So it's kind of, we're at this point where we're saying, okay, well, where do we go now? Can we make this better? And it's going to be harder to change some of the states that already have an established mitigation program, but could we make something better here that could in turn help lead other states into reform of what they're doing, if it's valuable? Or maybe it's not. But it's probably time, Peter said it's time to rethink stream mitigation metrics. And right now we're managing rivers, try to manage them without space, with space, without constraints, for having good flow regimes, things that are normal, opposed to some of the flow regimes that are so influenced by upstream flow removals or flow inputs or reservoirs or infiltration basins. And then we also want to look at sediment continuity in these things. So What that means is that equivalency of focus on process and space, riverscape areas could be in a credit matrix. So we could say, how much is that entire room that you're given for this river, opposed to just what's the length of river. So how much buffer are you given as well. And then watershed stratification, we can have watersheds that have more value based on things that are happening within that watershed, or degree of hydraulic alteration. We're trying to get that with the SQT currently. And certainty, you know, you can promote change in tolerance, acceptable ranges of performance, complexity of matrices over times, and an evolution of tolerance. So if we can actually already write these into a lot of mitigation. The interesting thing about stream mitigation is where you have an emerging market, you can create a precedence by writing a really good mitigation banking prospectus and say, this is how we look at things. But you don't want to lose credit, and you don't want to get yourself in a situation where the next person can come in and create a lot cheaper stream mitigation credit than you can, just because you incorporated uncertainty and your equivalency was slightly different. So in reviewing this, I got this sent to me by some people that were a little critical about this. And I would argue that I don't see a whole lot to be that critical of. I think it's just an opportunity to move forward in a slightly different direction as we're moving to areas that don't see as much mitigation yet. It's going to be more complicated. It's going to be a little bit harder to understand, but I don't see it as a real negative thing or a real hit on the industry. Martin Doyle and Peter Skidmore put together this. We always like to see these diagrams where you see different aspects or matrix, and then there's a little sweet spot in the middle where all the matrices come together. It's like, that's where we're trying to do a design. And I don't know if this was just sarcasm or how they're looking at it, because there's no real numbers associated with this. I think they're just trying to stimulate different thought. But what they're showing is these different matrices and showing that they don't always overlap. Sometimes there's not a great overlap, so you almost have to choose which matrices are most important and then decide where we want to go from there. And maybe there's some matrices that we just can't even consider. And maybe there's no overlap between them. Maybe we just need to focus on these functions or these matrices instead of trying to find that sweet spot where everything's perfect. With that said, I would argue that a lot of these functional metrics and corridor connectivity matrices are inherently overlapping. So there are some things that do overlap more than what this diagram shows. But the thought that it's possible you could have matrices that don't overlap, I think it's something for us to consider in river restoration field. So the Wyoming-Colorado SQT is a way of looking at functional assessment. It's well-intentioned, has a lot of work went into creating it. And it tries to account for complexity, but just really can't account for all the complexity. It clearly doesn't work for all streams or even many common stream types, but this was always acknowledged from the start. I think, you know, when Will Harmon and the folks from the EPA were sending around, they were saying not going to work for every stream type. There's a lot of confusion and frustration among the regulator communities on how to use the SQT. I think it's at times becomes very difficult because they'd rather see a price, you know, on their price tag, opposed to trying to figure out what that price tag is and trying to figure out how valuable is that milk compared to the other milk sitting in the cooler. And then it could be a lot simpler, maybe even much simpler, without losing too much function. And that's something that Peter had mentioned. I don't know what that is. And that's one of the reasons I want to have a discussion with him. I want to see kind of what his thoughts are on how we could make this simple for him. But with that said, that is the end of Peter's presentation. And here's his contact information. He gave some acknowledgments to Karen Boyd up in Montana and Martin Doyle at Duke University and Tracy from the EPA. So by all means, if you wanted to reach out to Peter, you could reach out to Peter with this email address here. I did, and I'll be talking to him in about next month. please feel free to pass on it. If you look at this and think about it later, if you're driving down the road and have more thoughts, please feel free to pass on any thoughts or questions to me, and I will pass them on to Peter when I talk to him on November 11th. So, with that said, does anybody have any comments, questions, thoughts, concerns that they want to bring up about this presentation?
Dave, it's Brad. I'll just throw in a few comments based on sort of experience up here. It's interesting, you know, when you go through it, it's almost like a sequential process where we don't know how to do it, but we just try to keep getting better each time and with each iteration. And I'm finding the same thing in Canada because we're starting down this road. Nobody knows where to go. So there are a lot of things that I'd like to try and bring in, but they're just not ready for it and they haven't got their head into it. So we're kind of having to sequentially move through that same process that's gone through in the States, albeit at a somewhat accelerated level or speed. But it's like it's like steps you got to go through to get there. You just can't. Well, we don't know what the end point is because we still haven't figured it out perfectly. So we can't just immediately go there. So what we're having to do is sort of replicate some of the stuff that's gone on in other jurisdictions. Again, recognizing much like the SQT that it's not perfect, but you need something. So you try to move forward with it. So.
This is Josh Gilman. Thanks for presenting that, Dave. I think that's a great talking point. I think we need to constantly be self-evaluating what we're doing. And it reminds me of, I have a thought on this. This isn't a new topic in my mind, but I've always felt like, you know, while a lot of our goals and objectives have been driven by policy has been sort of unidimensional on how we look at streams. And I don't think it should be received as a discredit to those before us. I think a lot of work, for instance, when North Carolina was pioneering in the early 2000s, we were reacting to policy. So when policy takes on a dimensional perspective, and in fact, I think all of the linearity of the whole process is kind of a replication of how we got in this mess the first time. If we go back and the first thing you talked about is healthy rivers, yeah, that's part of the problem. You know, a lot of people think single-threaded rivers, healthy rivers, and there's a lot of talk these days. And Ellen gave a talk Ellen Wool, Dr. Wool gave a talk last week about messy rivers and messiness. And we see in 2017, we finally got publications of how beavers are inserted in the process. And wait a minute, time out. You know, these rivers are not just stream pieces connected at a node with a wetland piece connected at a node with another type of stream. I mean, they're very complex systems. And I think it's smart and wise that we try to use surrogate knowledge to tag along, but we're learning how that linear mindset and that surrogate knowledge is failing us. And looking more at the landscape, I think is really important, especially as we move out west and look out west. We've had some issues. You know, land values have been defined by this part of a large ecosystem, this little stream piece, and this stream piece isn't going to restore the whole ecosystem. The stream piece is only a reaction, you know, it's a reflection of the ecosystem. So I think this is a great presentation. It's worth talking about.
Thank you, Josh.
One point I wanted to make is we often assign value to the stream function, and in these natural systems that do have some, you know, that aren't necessarily linear. I mean, they're not linear projects, but the stream function and the value we assign it and how it's working is there's a temporal nature to it. I mean, these streams have a tendency to make their own adjustments and features and such, but I feel like, you know, that's part of our fixed mindset that we need to back out of. If we can bring more diversity into the policy, then I think it can shed its way through academia and practice. And we're not selling milk either. Milk is a commodity. This is not. I know mitigation bankers think of it, sometimes it's a little bit of a commodity and a cash flow thing, but we need to get away from that commoditization of our resource. This is our sustenance.
Yeah, I agree with you. We're not selling milk. It's an example, but yeah, we're kind of lucky in the West where we don't have a mitigation market, because every one of our mitigation banking prospectus could add as much complexity as we desire into this process. The issue is we're generally too scared to do so. And that's the hard thing, is we're scared that, okay, if we add this much complexity, will the next person make it really simple, and then they'll be selling credits based on a per linear foot basis, whereas we're having this complex functional foot idea that's harder to determine. So that's a hard thing to get to, how we progress forward in this situation.
Well, there's a risk, a cost moving forward, and in a lot of industries where the government's supportive of that industry or commodity, there's sometimes a subsidy identified to offset some of those potential risks. And maybe if we had, clearer policy, or maybe, I don't know, maybe even some publicly funded, fully funded, not an in lieu fee program or anything, just like, here's what we would like to do. SQT is nice, and it's a tool. It doesn't offer science, it offers a communication framework. And I think that it builds upon that pyramid. But we need to build that science to backfill the SQT. It's funny because SQT comes out from practice standpoint, when really it's influencing how we perceive the resource and then in turn the policy. So it's funny, we haven't seen a lot of that practice affecting policy in that way, but I think it's a good tool in the future.
Dave, do you have a copy of the 2020 data or paper? I just did a quick Google search and I can't see where he's got it published just yet.
I haven't seen it yet, Jonathan. So I imagine, I've been blessed to know Martin Doyle. I appreciate Martin Doyle, but he's not the personality that's going to share his publication before it's published too much. So I would be surprised if we could find it anywhere before it's published.
Gotcha.
But once I see it come out, I'll forward it on to the group.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks a lot. If anybody has anything they want to talk about next week or week after, let me know, whether it's technical or from the inspiration standpoint. I'll stay on the line until whoever is off the line, and then I think that's it. So have a great week, guys. Thanks a lot for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, hey, we'll see you.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, how you doing, Massette?
I'm good.
Good.
Were you on the call for the Ralston Creek design
I was,
on
yeah.
Thursday? Is there any
I was, yeah.
work being generated this week to work on that? Or I'm not sure what I'm
Yeah,
working on this week.
Yeah, I think Noah's going to be sending, let's see, if you can't, I think Noah sent something on Friday. Yeah, there he goes. Do you have time? So he sent something on Saturday at 5 a.m. Do you have time early next week to incorporate some revisions to Ralston Creek's enhancement? Overall, the team is pleased with the current direction. We received feedback. So he definitely gave you some stuff that you can look at on your email. So.
Okay.
And I don't think there's a whole lot that I'm going to do. I think most of it he's just going to direct you to do, because it doesn't seem like it's a whole lot of work. It looks like it's about a day's worth of work. So,
Is that just plan set revisions right there, or? Hello, can you hear me?
yeah, I'm looking at everything here. I think it's I think it's some plan sheet revisions. It might be a slight channel alignment. So like they're saying, adjust the channel alignment away from the steep roadway embankment to avoid expensive bank stabilization. Consider drop riffles in proximity with stormwater outfall. So I don't think a whole lot of, it looks like it's some minor changes to channel alignments and sinuosity, but it's not going to be anything super major. So.
Okay. All right.
And I would ask Alex and stuff too. Since they decided that I was not to be a part-time as needed employee, I certainly don't mind working with you on the projects, but it's not my role to be directing you for any work right now, just because Alex, of course, has to direct now. So.
Okay, that's good.
Cool, man. So, and how did Monty like the drive back? Was that one of the longer drives she's ever had?
Yeah, she was kind of freaked out about the snow coming at your windshield. Yeah.
Did you hit any slick spots, or was it safe enough on your drive way back? Just kind of freaked out.
Just a slow drive, but yeah. It was. We didn't hit any slicks.
Yeah. We got about 1.5 feet at the house, but we got in a lot of sledding last night, so that was good. Or yesterday afternoon.
Sledding? You guys did sledding?
We did, yeah. Yep.
Nice. Good.
And we have Max is staying with us right now, who's a current intern, and so he's trying to decide if he wants to continue to work with us or not. So he's just staying at the house for about 2 months, and then he'll go back to Georgia and decide if he wants to come back here and how he does that. But we just kind of figured he could stay at the house in that time. So he got to go sledding, and he hasn't been around snow too much, so that was fun for him, I think. So fun for the kids as well.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, and if you have kind of how I won't be able to direct you with kind of work anymore, just because I'm not in SWC anymore, but I'm still a subcontractor, and I have an agreement with Ralston Creek and stuff, and Noah will have those things with me. And when you have technical questions, by all means, still feel free to ask me. It's just when it becomes more of a policy issue, then I'll probably just kind of pass on making a judgment on that, and let Alex or others do that with you. So.
All right. Sounds good.
All right. We'll see you. Have a great day.
See ya. Bye.